a challenge here because it has been opened up in a very interesting fashion. So I have talked about education for sustainable development. Also, I'm having a challenge, the way we opened it up. Just close it and open it up again. Yes. We opened it without, yeah. Oh, sorry, let's go back to that. Okay, go back here. Yes, we didn't download it, so you see it's running in a crazy way. Okay. Thank you very much. Open. Great. And then we do a slide. Great. That is okay. And you see now it's bigger actually. Okay. So that was my name. So I define multiculturalism, multilingualism, sustainable development, and education for sustainable development. Again there, that is a holistic approach to learning. We've put in the idea of learning in education for sustainable development, which aims to empower individuals and communities to make informed decisions and then take actions that contribute to sustainability. So ECD equips individuals with knowledge, skills, and values and attitudes needed to create a more sustainable and equitable world. And when we integrate sustainability principles into education at all levels, then we can empower learners to become agents of change and contribute to building a more resilient and sustainable future. Then I looked at multiculturalism and multilingualism in educational setting. And you can see what I have highlighted in red, that it aims, both multiculturalism and multilingualism contribute to creating inclusive, enriching environments that celebrate diversity and promote equity and social cohesion. And we have respect for cultural diversity because of multilingualism, creating inclusive learning environments where people feel valued, particularly students, okay? And those settings, multicultural and multilingual, help students to gain insights into the different worldviews, the perspectives, and ways of fostering of life, which foster empathy, tolerance, and intercultural competence. When we do this, we become global citizens. And multilingualism also recognizes linguistic diversity. And it promotes language equity by providing opportunities for students to learn and use their mother language alongside additional languages of instruction. So it's one good thing that when you have your mother tongue and you know it well, then you're able to use additional languages besides the mother tongue. And multilingual and multicultural setups allows for diverse learning styles, preferences, and needs. It will also allow students to have their identities, okay? So the cultural responsible practices will validate student identities and also prior knowledge. So I've dwelt a little bit on multiculturalism because we have culture and arts, and multilingualism. I know people may still wonder what is the difference between multiculturalism, multilingualism, and multi-ethnicity. Those are terms that we often use in communication and language. But we want to look at the importance of mother language in education, which is very profound. And I think the previous speakers have talked about that. But one thing is clear, which is clear, is that learning in one's mother tongue enhances cognitive development And this includes the literary skills, the critical thinking, and problem-solving abilities. You listen to these key words, and it reminds you of CBC, okay? And then also, children develop a strong foundation in their mother language, which serves as a framework for learning additional languages and academic subjects. So that is also quite important. And also it has been proven that when we use mother language in the initial early years of education, it enables students to comprehend and engage with academic content more effectively. And I think in this country, we have from the lower primary, where students are taught in the language of the catchment area, be it Swahili or the Luo or Kikuyu. That was for a reason. Another thing is that mother languages are integral to individuals' cultural identity and a sense of belonging. This is very important for the individual if they're to move on. And this affirms their cultural heritage, values, and tradition. Also a feeling of pride and self-esteem when you have mother tongue as an integral part of what you do. So mother tongues are therefore not only a means of communication, but also a vehicle for knowledge transmission, cultural preservation, and social empowerment. Now, mother language education plays a crucial role in preserving linguistic heritage and preventing language loss. I think one of the speakers talked about language loss, and it ensures the continuity of languages that are endangered or vulnerable. I think we have quite a number of languages that are endangered in this world and also in Kenya. So this, while preventing language loss, would safeguard linguistic diversity as a source of cultural heritage. At the same time, mother languages in education promote linguistic diversity and inclusion. I did say that in the beginning, so that we recognize the value of all languages and language varieties. And it also acknowledges the linguistic rights of minorities and indigenous communities who we do not leave behind in this global society. How then can we integrate mother language in education for sustainable development? One, we can incorporate mother languages as mediums of instruction in ECD programs, particularly at the early stages of education. I've already talked about that, okay? So that everybody has got equal access to educational opportunities. Number two, adaptation of a curriculum that incorporates multicultural and multilingual perspectives that will reflect local contexts, languages, and cultural perspectives. So the development of a curricula that brings on board all the different languages. At the same time, let us look at the community-based experiences that leverage the linguistic and cultural assets of local communities. So we could encourage students to explore sustainability challenges and solutions within their own communities. Can we draw from their experiences, draw upon their mother language to document, analyze, and communicate findings? We can also utilize technology, and I saw a theme there, to support mother language learning and teaching and advance multilingual education. Use tools that are used, we can have tools to facilitate the recording and preservation of endangered languages as well as marginalized languages, which would eventually be put into future use. I remember one time, myself and a group of us, we worked on trying to restore Yaku. I don't know how many people know that language called Yaku. It is spoken in some part of Laikipia. And so we collected all this in CDs and hoped that let not the last Yaku speaker die. And there were less than 10 at that time. I've not found out how many more are still remaining. And you may wonder how come it is dying and there are people. The children are born, but they speak Kimasai and Kisamburu. Only their parents were now speaking Yaku. So we could do that documentation for preservation. We can also use multilingual resources as digital libraries, e-books, and online courses providing access to learners who could use the contents to learn their mother language. And we also have popular resources and tools for learning different languages. I am a testimony of that. I'm actually using Duolingo to improve on my German, which I learned 20 years ago. And I think it's proving very interesting. Some people use Rosetta Stone, etc. So look for all this. And you'd also find those resources being able to teach you to learn the Luo and many other languages. We are on a project, or working on a project like that. And then we can also provide professional development opportunities for teachers to equip them. In short, let us train our teachers. Even if you want to ensure that mother tongue is taught, who's going to teach? Are the teachers well equipped? Even with the CBC program, very good. But who will teach the vernaculars for that matter? Okay? And then we can also advocate for policies that promote linguistic diversity. At the end of the day, after we've talked and talked and talked, what policies are there to ensure that this happens? What are the challenges? So despite its numerous benefits, implementing mother tongue as a medium of instruction in schools will face and still faces severe challenges. The lack of sufficient resources, and coming back to include qualified teachers for the specific languages. Do we have instructional materials for that? And curriculum frameworks to support mother tongue language-based instructions effectively? That may be a challenge. Yet another challenge is limited funding and infrastructure to hinder efforts to develop and implement the language-appropriate teaching resources and support system. So infrastructure is an issue. Funding is an issue. The educators may lack training and proficiency in teaching subjects in mother tongue. And of course, training and giving them professional opportunity may require significant financial investment and also their time. This is a very critical thing on language attitude and prestige. I don't know how many people will proudly say, I speak the Luo, particularly when they are younger people. And of course, there are some languages, when you say you speak that language, they ask you, which language was that? Because it's a small language. And so some people feel inferior and are unable to speak their language. So attitude, prestige, a challenge. A lot of negative attitude and stigma and perceptions of inferiority can impede efforts to promote the use of such languages as mediums of instruction in school. Yet another challenge is we need to develop standard orthographies and linguistic standards for mother languages. Quite challenging, quite expensive, especially if the language has diverse dialects or oral traditions. I remember when we were sitting during tea time, and we were trying to ask, how do you say plus? Multiply by, and we were taking the Luo as an example. It proved quite challenging. Quite expensive to do so. I know in Tanzania we have an academy that does a lot of work on Swahili, but that one is not very cheap. We've got to put money aside for that, and yet we've got to start. And then we need to establish consensus among speakers and linguistic experts on the writing systems. What are the grammar rules? What are the vocabulary? Or what is the vocabulary? And this can take time, number one. But number two, there's a very important thing there. Resistance from various stakeholders. So you're moving forward and moving backward. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So that is a challenge. And then adapting existing curricula and educational materials to incorporate mother languages require very careful planning and coordination. We need to ensure that the learning objectives, the content, assessments are aligned with educational standards, while we are still reflecting the linguistic and cultural contents of students. So this is a real challenge. And I know Kabarak University, you've been reviewing your curricula and trying to see how you infuse CBC in it. I think that is not that's no mean achievement. Congratulations for that. I think many universities have not moved as far as you have. Very challenging, very time-consuming to ensure that the objectives, the learning outcome, are in line with educational standards. And now we are also infusing mother tongue into this. Then transition to additional languages may prove to be challenging. Students may struggle to adjust to instruction in a second language. They already have a first language. How do they transit to a second language? It's not as easy as it is said, and dropout rates may also be quite large. Now, this implementation requires supportive policies, political will, and commitment. But this may not always be the case due to conflicting priorities. Sometimes we have competing interests and language ideologies that probably may not support linguistic diversity and equity. When we teach, we need to do assessments, and developing assessments and evaluation methods that, and that is the word, accurately measure students' learning outcomes in mother language-based instruction can be challenging. We have standardized tests and assessments that need to be adapted or developed to account for linguistic diversity and cultural differences among the students. And then lastly, societal changes, urbanization, technical advancements can influence language use and transmission within communities. The world is very dynamic. And so as languages evolve and adapt to changing contexts, then educational systems must continuously adapt to ensure that mother languages remain relevant and valued in education. That may be a challenge to say that we are in step all the time. And so how do we conclude? I will say that using the mother language as a vehicle for promoting multilingualism and multiculturalism in education is instrumental in advancing sustainable development by preserving cultural identity, facilitating learning, promoting multilingualism, enhancing intercultural understanding, and empowering communities as well as promoting environmental stewardship. And we can summarize also that multiculturalism and multilingualism enrich education settings. We should encourage it because they foster inclusiveness, respect, and supportive environments where students can thrive academically, socially, and also emotionally. Sometimes we forget that the emotional perspective is also very important. Embracing linguistic and diversity and linguistic plurality in education promotes equity, very important, intercultural understanding, and prepares students to become informed, empathetic, global citizens. I think we are all striving to be global citizens, not just citizens of this country, but globally, that we are able to look at the environment. We are able to see a continuity and a sustainability for this environment. I thank you for listening to me.
Yes. Thank you, Prof. A round of applause to Prof. Yes. Thank you very much, Prof, for that wonderful presentation. Yeah, we'll open room for questions after the presentation. So if you have any question, please note it down. Then after that, you're going to ask after this. So we are moving to the next presenter, who is Evelyn Ooko, to give the framework of culture and arts. Welcome.
Good afternoon. As they are setting up for Madam Evelyn, we want to appreciate Professor Yeke for her presentation on multilingualism, multiculturalism in education. Let us give her a round of applause. While they are setting up for Madam Evelyn, we invite questions to Professor on our presentation. My one question, Professor Yeke, as others have that opportunity also. I think on the challenges that you presented facing mother language instruction in our schools is attitude. That is a major problem that we have in Kenya, because if you want to instruct our students or our children in mother language, the first people who will protest are the parents. They will say, we don't want our children to learn in mother language. And I want to have a proposal that there should be a mother language day in every ECD program. That the children should start at ECDE level. That while we have Kiswahili Day, when students speak English the whole day, we should also have a mother language day in our schools. I don't know how the Ministry of Education can take that into consideration so that right from ECD level, our students are instructed in our mother language. Secondly, Prof, is the issue of the accent. When I was growing up, if I could speak English or Kiswahili and my Kalenjin accent comes up, people would laugh at me and say, you have an accent. That accent is not good. If you pronounce, because among the Kalenjins we have a problem with F and P. Sometimes we confuse the sounds. So I don't know how you can comment. Is it something that we can be proud of? Our Meru accent, our Kalenjin accent, the way we speak. Because when I listen to the president of Russia, when he speaks or gives any speech, he does it in Russian, and when he speaks English, he speaks with a Russian accent. So, and nobody is questioning that. How come my Kalenjin accent is a problem in Kenya? or whichever language it is, and we get laughed at. So that is why I'm saying attitude is the key. So I don't know your comments on that, and also on the issue of instruction, right from the ECD level. Any other question that the members of the audience could have for Professor Yeke as the presenter, as Dr. Evelyn's presentation is being put on? Are they ready? We await questions from the members of the audience to Professor Yeke. While we await, yes, Madam Anne Somba, you can.
Okay, first I would like to appreciate Professor Yeke for that very good presentation on multilingualism and multiculturalism and its place in sustainable education. I agree with her that we need political goodwill for us to be able to grow our L1s, our mother tongues. But when you look at the recommendations of different educational commissions, from Ominde all the way through Mackay, and even the Constitution and the provisions that they have given for language, it indicates that there is political goodwill, because all those commissions recommend the teaching of the first levels of education using the first language of the catchment area. Most of them recommend that. And even in the 2010 Constitution of Kenya, there is provision for the development of African languages and even their use in teaching, especially the first years, for them to provide scaffolding for the teaching of the other languages later. Now, I think the problem lies in implementation of those recommendations. So as much as they allow or they recommend the use of those languages, the implementation never happens. So I do not know where the political will ends. Is it at the recommendations by the commissions, or should we follow up and have them their recommendations implemented? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are two questions to Professor. We can take another one. Then we can have Professor Yeke respond to those questions. Any other hand? Professor, okay, we have a question from Dr. Njidonye. Have the microphone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Yeke, for the insightful presentation. And also I want to follow up from what Madam Anne Somba has highlighted on your presentation. And I think it is a big challenge. First of all, let me begin by that to the schools of education in this country. Because Madam Anna has asked I said that the issue of language is in the implementation, because in the Constitution, in all the documents that she has cited, there are recommendations which are worth adopting. But who is it that is supposed to implement them? So to me, I think first is the schools of education, because they are the ones who train the teachers. And that should cascade even to those who teach teachers at those who teach in the lower levels, the ones we used to call P1 colleges. And so I think maybe my question now comes there for Professor Yeke, because she has been in this field for a long time. Why is it that the schools of education and the institutions that train teachers, why is it that they are not coming forward? Because yes, the government is there, but the government is waiting for someone to drive the agenda. If we wait for the political goodwill, it might take time. But I think we can mount pressure, especially the schools of education and the colleges that teach teachers can mount pressure on the system, because it is partly managed by the government and also partly managed by the system of education. Why is it that this has been very hard? You actually cited a weakness in the system and asked the question, are the teachers equipped to teach mother tongue? I am in media, for example. We have a course called vernacular reporting. Kenya is actually one of the countries in Eastern Africa that has many local language radio stations and media. But we insist that that student who has been taught in English, they go back to report in college. You know what they do? They start training them again. Even when we are training vernacular reporting, we train it in English. Because we, for example, we are not able to teach those local languages. So our students are training, and those are the people who will go now and start reporting to the community. Why is it that it has been a very hard nut to crack? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Andonye. Those are 4 questions. Maybe we can have Professor Yeke respond to them for a few minutes before we present. We have our next presenter, Madam Evelyn. So Professor Yeke, give her the microphone.
Thank you very much. And even as I'm responding, I'm encouraging our students to engage with us, okay? Because you're the people who are on the ground and you really know what is happening out there. So number 1 was attitude. And really attitude is a very big thing when we want to implement something new. And there are people who are opposed to change, number 1. But attitude for mother languages, because people think that they make you be, quote unquote, less educated. Maybe what we could do is create more awareness on the importance of mother language. And I like the way we have adopted this on a World Mother's Language Day. This is part of the awareness. And I wish you could have more of this and also engage with schools and where students are and where parents are on the importance of mother language. Then you have suggested, that was Professor Kitikoko, that we can have a mother language day in schools or in the Republic. I think this is very important. Only one challenge: what is the framework? How will it be done? How many languages do we have in this country? And you know, there are those ones that are always dominating, so to speak, again, quote and unquote, and those ones that have never been heard. How are we going to make sure that it is inclusive of all the languages? Still quite a daunting task, but it's a good idea, and we could think about it and how to work it out. You've also talked about the accent. And sometimes when people speak in accents that reflect their mother language, people sneer and say, what a language. I will tell you my own perspective as a specialist in applied linguistics and also as a communication person. I usually tell my students, I don't mind the accent in which you're talking as long as you can communicate. Of course, strive to ensure that you're not misinterpreted because of a lot of interference. But for me, communication is the key word. Are we able to communicate? And the grammar, that everything is fine. I will tell you, go to Britain, and you'll find some people speaking English, and you wonder, is this the English that I learned? Because there are very many dialects in Britain also. And people speak their dialects in the house, but go to school to learn the standard English, which you're also striving to learn. So I accept those different accents. I don't have a problem with them. And I wish everybody would do that as long as we can communicate. Anne Somba talks of the language of the catchment area and the implementation. That is still a challenge, and I think Michael has also come up with it and asked who will implement. So we have policies, they lie there. Part of our constitution is one of the best constitutions in this country. But I know implementation and interpretation of certain things is quite a difficult thing. Maybe we still have some way to go, but I think we should be committed to the implementation process. And you're wondering, as Michael was just talking about it, Dr. Somba is Dr. Donye, he's my student, so I'm so used to calling him Michael, one-time student. I'll give you this example. There are so many theses that are written, beautiful proposals, beautiful recommendations. They are all just lying there in some library. I mean, if we implemented all of them, this country would really, really be beautiful. Maybe we can think, do we have point persons at universities who could sit in some boards in the ministry, I don't know, to be able to help with all these things, and then cascade, bring back, cascade, bring back. It's something that is food for thought still. Otherwise, why are we doing research if we cannot implement what we have? That's what I would say. I thank you for listening to me.
A round of applause for Professor Yeke. By the way, for your information, Professor Yeke has so many students, some of whom are seated at the high table here with us. You have seen Dr. Somba assisting his professor when she was having a challenge with the gadgets. That is her students. Dr. Somba is one of the products of Professor Yeke's work. Give them a round of applause. At the same time, we have Dr. Ndonye, who is also a product of Professor Yeke. Makofi kwao. In addition to that, ako kwa jikoni is Madam Anne Somba. She's in the pipeline now. I think she's graduating this year. Makofi kwake, still under the tutelage of Professor Yeke. Si amefanya kazi mzuri? And you can notice the accent she's speaking, British accent, British, pure. So thank you, Professor Yeke. You are a good teacher.
I wanted just to make a quick observation. I think Dr. Ndonya raised something that I think, is there anywhere we can assemble, like you said, any school of education which is trying to implement this? Because I'm a very strong believer, even if the government says anything, what I've seen with the agricultural projects that are being done across is they look at somewhere where somebody is already implementing, and they surround around that to tell others it works. So do we have a sample of a school where something of the nature is where they're taking that kind of an issue in place, where others can benchmark and say it's working for this? Because unless we get it to work, I think it will remain in the shelves for the thesis, and it will remain a discussion, a conversation within the government sector. So that's why I was wondering, are there people who are willing, or are you saying we stretch ourselves as Scarborough at the beginning something? I just wonder, because I thought that was a very good idea, that it should be working somewhere. Someone must win a marathon, then others can be mobilized. But if there's no starting point, where do we go? So I wondered whether you would make a comment on that. Is there anywhere people are close to that kind of intervention?
I'm yet to see, but probably now with the CBC, maybe something will come out, probably. That is to the best of my knowledge. That point is very important, to the best of my knowledge. Thank you.
I think as far as taking the lead, that is now the honors on the School of Education, Kabarak University, to take it up and maybe come up with a proposal or an idea to take charge of that implementation. So under the tutelage of Professor DeBoss, of course. So thank you. We have come to the end of the question and answer session. In case you have any, you can still, we still have Professor Yeke around. So at this point, I want to ask Madam Evelyn Owoko, to come to the podium and take it away from here. Karibu, Madam.
Thank you, Prof. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I guess our sugar levels are going down, but I'll try to be as brief as possible. Now, before I embark on the culture and arts education, as the Director Quality Assurance and Standards, and coming from the Ministry of Education, we do have a mother tongue policy. And we are supposed to teach our lower classes in mother tongue. That was what was in place. But with the dynamics of the society, somehow along the way, mother tongue died. And you go to our schools and you find that we are using English and Kiswahili, and then we have a lesson for mother tongue in the timetable. But ideally, we are supposed to teach our children in the lower primary in the mother tongue of the area. Apart from the urban centers where it's now English and Kiswahili because of the mixed societies. Coming with the CBC, we've come up with indigenous languages. But as I heard professors saying, which is the indigenous language of where we are? So those challenges hinder the implementation of mother tongue or mother language as we are calling it now. But I believe that when we look at the older generation who are taught in mother tongue, they are more eloquent than us who seem to prescribe to English and Kiswahili. But moving into CBC, and as I stand here in our teacher training colleges, all trainees are supposed to take an indigenous language. But who is supposed to teach this indigenous language? So there are so many questions that still take us back to the table. And Provost, if you can run with it and start, because we must be able to train somebody to go and train the trainee in this indigenous language. Because it's not about talking or speaking in mother tongue. It is learning and teaching in mother tongue, which is different. If I was to teach in my mother tongue, it would not be the same as speaking my mother tongue, because teaching has its own pedagogy that we are supposed to apply. And as somebody else has said, we have beautiful policies in place. Implementation is our biggest challenge as a country. And people come and run with our policies and go to their countries, implement them, and they are now overtaking us. So the challenge is, let's develop these policies, but let's ensure that we implement them. And as we go on encouraging mother tongue, as we are discussing on the side, we are saying, we would all want to identify with the mother language. So let's start with ourselves. Ask yourself, would you like your children to speak your mother language? And if we start at home, then it shall be able to spread around. So let's be the ambassadors that mother language is something good that we need to propagate and not let it die, because it's our identification. It's what makes us who we are. And remember what I think the Deputy Vice Chancellor Chola said. There are those people who make English a distance fourth and not the first. So as a country, where are we in terms of appreciating our language? So that would be my input as we move forward. So my presentation, how long do I have now that it's lunchtime? I have 15 minutes. I hope I'll manage. and to the best of your expectations now that we are in the CBC era. So I'm supposed to talk about the framework for culture and arts education, which I am told is a framework which has been adopted, and we are in the process of completing our draft version, which NATCOM will share with you. So my main task today is to try in 15 minutes to unpack the framework, which is culture and arts education. So we have what we call the introduction, we have the principles, the objectives, the scope, the strategic goals, implementation modalities, critical areas for future engagement, monitoring, follow-up and review, and conclusion. So as we've been told that in 2021, the UNESCO member states decided to have an elaborate framework for culture and education to promote greater access, inclusion in education and in culture. And in summary, this has been done, and this was this year, in February, in Abu Dhabi, it was adopted. So the framework for culture and arts education was adopted, as we've said, this year in February in Abu Dhabi. And then Kenya has hosted regional consultative meetings, which were held online from between 8th and 9th February, and there was input from both the stakeholders. The purpose of this framework, for the purpose of this framework, culture is defined as, and I found this a very interesting definition of culture, set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features that characterize a society or a group. And this does not only include arts and letters, but also modes of life, the fundamental rights of the human being, the value systems, traditions, and beliefs. It captivated me because we look at culture as what we do in our community, but you can see it's a very expansive, whatever aspect. We can transmit culture through words, which is literature, oral literature, and language, through music, through dance, through visual arts, through theater, through designs, through crafts, digital media, and all types of whatever we've listed down here. And tomorrow, we actually expect to see this live now. Today, we are doing the academic aspect, but tomorrow we expect to see our culture through our literature, our dance, our expressions, and all that. For this framework, we are defining education as an inalienable human right, a right to everybody. This is a lifelong and society-wide process through which everyone learns and develops to their fullest potential. The whole of their personality, sense of dignity, talents, and mental and physical abilities within and for the benefit of local, national, regional, and global communities and ecosystems. So education is just not the knowledge that we are getting in the four walls of a building, but it goes beyond that, and it's supposed to be local, national, regional, and global. And that's why sometimes we say, be local but think globally. So whatever we do should be able to fit in the global, the regional, and the national perspective. Culture and arts education include teaching and learning about, with and through the arts and culture, as well as all forms of cultural and artistic expressions. Culture and arts education positions culture, including the arts, as an educational tool, an approach, and a field of study, research, and practice. So we are actually saying that culture and arts is a tool within the education sector. It should be holistic, transformative, and impactful. I'm not very good at technology, so I don't know if I've escaped something. But now we are on our 7 guiding principles. So we have 7 principles which are going to guide the framework, and that is 1, to ensure that culture and arts education is a common good of humanity and should be accessible to all. That it guarantees that culture and education is grounded within the human rights and fundamental freedoms. That we mainstream gender equality in all aspects of policy planning, design, and implementation. That we recognize cultural diversity as a defining feature and common heritage of humanity that expands the choices. As we sit here, I believe our cultural diversity is our strength. That the framework ensures inclusion, non-discrimination, and respect for diversity, and through education at all levels and in all forms, which addresses uncounter-bullying, stereotypes, all forms of discriminatory and hateful bias, and actions that incite discrimination, racism, xenophobia, hostility, or violence. We know we have stereotypes towards certain cultures. We say these people are like this, these people are like this. So this framework should be able to guide us to move away from that kind of perception. The framework should enable co-creation, building on diversity of culture, which I've mentioned, culture and arts education, experiences and practices, and the active and meaningful participation of all actors and beneficiaries, such as learners and the youth in particular. And then the framework will promote lifelong and life-wide learning in a diversity of settings and environments, encompassing physical spaces such as classrooms, community spaces, workplace, cultural and natural spaces, and virtual spaces, such as the digital platforms or blended spaces that combine both. I guess with COVID, we've embraced the virtual space. There are three objectives of the framework. One is to ensure culture and arts education contributes directly to the realization of sustainable development and peace in accordance with present and future UN efforts. I remember when Nancy was talking, she was saying UNESCO's objective is to create peace in our society and peace in our minds. So, and future, including the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and all its 17 SDGs, and in particular, SDG 4, to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong opportunities for all, and SDG 8, to promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all. Objective number 2, we are supposed to harness contemporary advances and seize the opportunities opened up by technology while identifying, preventing, and mitigating risks, notably in digital technologies and artificial intelligence. Then we have the third one, to integrate effectively culture and arts education in relevant policies, strategies, and programs in and across the culture and education sectors, with regard to regulations, curricula, teacher and educator training, qualifications, and professional development. I think this is what we were speaking to just before I started the presentation about the curricula, the teacher, and the educator trainer. The scope. The UNESCO framework considers culture and arts education as an ecosystem which covers educational activities for all people, delivered in all contexts and in formal, non-formal, and informal settings, using different pedagogies, especially those that embrace diverse cultural perspectives, activities, practices, expressions, materials, and objectives, and modalities such as offline, online, distant, and blended, as well as at all levels and of all types and provisions. We are open to ensure that culture and arts education is open. It is not structured, it is not restricted. It is as wide as that. Another scope that it is grounded on a broad understanding of culture as set out above, and includes processes such as intercultural dialogue and values, such as cultural, linguistic, and knowledge diversity. And we've just been taken through linguistic issues. It embraces and promotes multi-stakeholder collaboration and broad intersectoral partnerships among earlier education and cultural institutions, government bodies, cultural spaces, and 5 activities. I don't know which 5 those ones are, but memorial and heritage sites, artists and other cultural professionals and practitioners, researchers, local communities, the private sector, foundations, and civil society. And as you sit here, I think we have a mixture of all these people amongst us. We have 5 strategic goals which are very clear: access, inclusion, and equity in and through culture and arts education, contextual, quality, lifelong, and life-wide learning in and through culture, appreciation of cultural diversity and the capacity for critical engagement, skills to shape resilience, just and sustainable futures, and institutionalization and valorization of culture and arts education ecosystems. So those are the 5 strategic goals that we intend to achieve. The implementation modalities are very critical, and they are the following: governance, legislation, and policies. There will be need to transform governance and policies for culture and arts. And as we've said, when we develop these policies, let us try to implement them. The learning environment, this will entail broadening the concept of learning environments by establishing more sustained cooperation with formal, non-formal, and informal spaces. We don't have to stick to formal education to be able to have our culture and arts education. We should be able to have a variety of formal, non-formal, and informal learning spaces. We have learning experiences, which will include integrating diverse local knowledge systems, tangible and intangible cultural resources, such as living heritage and cultural practices and expressions, in and across, again, formal, non-formal, and informal education for rich, locally relevant, and intercultural learning experiences. The 4th modality is the teacher and the educators, which is very key and close to our heart, that it will be important to diversify the teaching profession, ensuring that it embodies the rich cultural diversities within societies. By including living heritage bearers, artists, and other cultural professionals and practitioners to foster communal care and support, exchange of knowledge, and co-creation necessary for transformative learning experiences in diverse physical, virtual, and blended spaces. And I guess this was our concern. Revise teacher education and professional development to include culture and arts education. Another modality on the teacher education is improve the status and working conditions of teachers, facilitators, trainers, and educators, as well as artists and other cultural professionals and practitioners working in culture and arts education, including employment, remuneration through adequate measures, resources, and infrastructure, flexible working modalities, and professional growth and well-being. In CBC now, we have what we are calling visual arts and performing arts. Unfortunately, we lack the teachers who can be able to teach these lessons. So we are actually encouraging the universities to come up with teacher trainers who can be able to handle the visual and the performing arts. Additionally, we need to promote measures to streamline school administration processes and to eliminate organizational barriers to enable teachers, trainees, and educators with the time and flexibility to establish initiatives and partnerships with cultural institutions, professionals, and practitioners. On digital technologies and AI, focus will be to leverage on media and information literacy to support the effective provision of culture and arts education in the digital era, while promoting creativity, emancipated, ethical, and responsible use of digital technologies. We broaden access to digital technologies for culture and arts education, and we promote research and innovation for the development of diverse, sustainable, ethical, and bias-free digital tools for culture and arts education, including those for artistic creation and for knowledge sharing and learning in, through, and with culture and arts. We are still on digital technologies, where we are going to harness human capacities to contribute towards the co-creation, use, and delivery of digital content enriched by local and cultural resources for culture and education. And then we expand collaboration in addressing evolving technologies and artificial intelligence in culture and arts education. On partnership and interinstitutional coordination, it will be important to innovate and expand partnerships and coordination mechanisms at international, regional, national, and local levels among governmental bodies, cultural institutions, schools, memorial and heritage sites, local communities, and civil organizations. So we must be able to work together to ensure the success of our framework. Then the seventh is the financing, which will require mobilization through public and private partnerships for the development of collaborative infrastructures and mechanisms, as well as administrative, human, and material resources for the long-term sustainability of the culture and arts education ecosystem. And the last one, I think, is the research and data and assessment, and this will be critical to strengthen existing or establish long-term and transformative mechanisms for systematic, comprehensive, collaborative, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary research for the development of robust data collection, analysis, and monitoring in a range of topics, especially those related to culture and arts education. And I think when Professor Ngala was introducing the team, we have a very strong team that Kabarak can run with this. Then we talk about monitoring, follow-up, and review. And with a view to advancing the strategic goals of the framework and assessing the achievements and lessons learned globally, the member states should support the implementation of the framework by sharing progress, good practices, and challenges to this end by harnessing existing reporting mechanisms such as the Global Report on Cultural Policies, the Global Education Monitoring Report, and those pertaining to SDG Target 4, 7, amongst others, to UNESCO on a voluntary basis, a progress report every 4 years on the implementation of the framework at the national level starting from next year. And in conclusion, culture and arts include teaching and learning about, with, and through the arts and culture. I would like to read that again. Culture and arts include teaching and learning about, with, and through the arts and culture, as well as all forms of cultural and artistic expressions. Culture and arts education position culture, including the arts, as an educational tool, an approach, and a field of study, research, and practice. Drawing on the diversities of cultural expressions, culture and arts enrich and revitalize education, offering diverse learners, including those in vulnerable situations, the means to express their humanity and to access a diversity of forms of expression, ways of thinking, knowing, being, and doing, as well as histories and languages of peoples and communities through which give meaning to their reading of the world. Those who are in arts and culture, this speaks volume. When she was talking about ethnic interference, we take ethnic interference in English as a gap. Yet to me, it's a combination of who you are and the ability to speak English. As a Luo, when I say si, I am proudly saying I am Luo. Because as Professor Yeke said, you still know I'm saying she, but with my interference, I'm expressing myself in my way of thinking, and I will say si, but you have still known what I have said. So culture and arts enables, expands, and sustains spaces and communities of learning. Kiswahili saying goes, mkosa mila ni, you must be very hungry. Thank you very much.
We can appreciate better than that. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. Maybe you can just get 1 or 2 questions or reactions from the members. Any question from the members? We have.
Good afternoon. I'd like to correct the last speaker. Si mkosa mila ni mwacha mila ni mtumwa. As a Kiswahili teacher. My question is, Kenya is a multi-language country. We have up to 47 plus languages. Now, if you're talking about implementing the multi-language and multicultural society, how can we do this if in our institutional setup we have 10 plus languages? For example, here in Kabarak, not all my friends are Kipsigis. We have very many languages. Now, as an instructor, how will instructors be able to teach up to more than 10 languages? That is one major problem. We are all talking about implementing, but you're not seeing the problem of how we shall be implementing this. For example, my lecturer, Mwalimu Kavoy, he will not be able to teach all the languages. My friend here is maybe a Kikuyu, I'm a Kipsigis. Now, Kavoy will not be able to teach all those languages. Now, that's a big problem in which we are all talking about implementing, but you're not talking about the problems of implementing that language. How are we going to sort that out?
Thank you, madam. You tell us your name so that we tuambie majina.
My name is Marion B. Marion Chapkoech.
Thank you very much. Another question, reaction? We have Reverend Provost.
I think, Dr. thank you for that presentation. I think it was amazing. 2 concerns. One is I'm just still wondering why the policy that you said is in place but is not able to be implemented. Apart from now the nature of our society, I think the intermarriages and the nature of work, we have Luos employed in Okambani, so when their children are going to school there and you say they all be taught a vernacular language, that I think is something that needs to be reviewed right away, because it doesn't seem anymore, even the intermarriages, without even talking about them, the realities. But on the framework, I wonder how much is that framework borrowing from the ethos of our African setup? Because what I hear a lot is, again, a Western mind view. I wonder, will that framework help anybody in this setting? Because I hear a lot of ideologies that are not even capturing things from who we are, from where we are. So I'm just wondering how with that framework even itself, maybe your team may need to revisit again and ask, will that framework produce anything useful to us as African setting? I was just curious.
Thank you for that. Maybe I have also maybe one question or a concern about your policies that contradicts. Like we had this policy of delocalization of teachers, whereby you are moving a teacher from their homes to other places. And at the same time, you want to implement this language policy. So I don't know how you came up to this delocalization thing without actually putting in mind that we have this other policy that's in place. Thank you.
Hapa. Asante mshereheshaji kwa kunipatia huu wakati. Mtaniwia radhi kwa sababu nitaongea kwa lugha ambayo naielewa zaidi. Na kwa sababu leo ni siku ya lugha mama. Mwasilishaji ambaye tayari ninampongeza kwa kutolea sera inayohusiana na utamaduni na sanaa. Ni sera ambayo ni nzuri sana ndani ya karatasi. Inavyoeleweka. Lakini kwangu leo nilikuwa natarajia angalau, yaani hatua moja tutoke kwa sera, kwa sababu tunasherehekea siku muhimu ya lugha mama. Kuwa hiyo sera yote kuhusu utamaduni na sanaa, na mwasilishaji mwingine ambaye ni daktari yake kuhusiana na yale ambayo ameyasema. Je, kwa sababu mimi naona ni wewe ni kiwakilishi cha kitengo muhimu cha elimu, ningetaka kuuliza, hii sera mtaifanya lini itembee? Ni lini itatembea? Kwa sababu wanaotunga sera wako ofisini na sisi tuko hapa mashinani. Na sera nimekuwa nikisoma, imekuwa wimbo. Lakini kwa sababu leo tumepatana hapa, utueleweshe. Je, hii sera unaona kuna uwezekano wa kuisukuma ili iweze kudhihirika? Ama mwaka ujao tunatarajia sera au policy na framework? Asante.
Thank you for those questions. Maybe you can react.
Thank you very much for those reactions, comments, or questions. We shall be able to respond to them as a team. I want to thank B for being very attentive, and I accept the correction. Every day is a learning day. On the issue of the very many tribes or the very many languages that we have, which is our strength? Remember, we talk about that it should be the language of the catchment area. The challenge we have is that some places there are very many dialects, but we focus on the main language of the catchment area. We also talk about learning these languages through formal, informal, and non-formal. So some will be through the formal structure, some will be through the informal or the non-formal. But we do understand that there are areas where there's a struggle as to which language will you teach our children in school, and that is normally handled at the school level. On the issue of delocalization, which I think has been addressed. But I think delocalization majorly affected the principals and the head teachers of our schools, but we still had teachers who were from the local regions. But it has soon been reversed, and that will be able to address the issue. And I think as I was talking, I said our teacher training colleges, as we go into this CBC dispensation, are supposed to train the teachers in an indigenous language, every teacher. But we still have teething problems because who is supposed to teach which language? But as we say, we are hoping to come out of the challenges we are facing. To the last speaker about the SERA and the policy. I think we are all aware that with CBC, we have created pathways in our senior school. And we are saying that we have 3 pathways. We have the science, the STEM pathway, we have the social sciences and the humanities, and we have the creative arts and the sports. So those learners of ours who are talented in arts and sports will be able to choose that pathway. And I think if we achieve senior school successfully, we'll have addressed the implementation of the framework. Currently, we support culture and arts through our core curricula, which is the music and the drama festivals and the sports. But we are all hopeful that as we move away from the knowledge-based curriculum to the competency-based curriculum, we shall be able to implement this policy and be able to achieve the culture and arts education framework. I would like my colleagues from NATCOM to talk about what our acting provost had mentioned. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can contribute something to do with how easy will it be to implement this framework. This framework was passed actually last week. We had over 90 ministers of education and culture and experts that met in Abu Dhabi. And the framework has just been launched. And development of this framework was very consultative, including all African regions. And what a framework does, it is just a general guideline. And countries are expected to prioritize according to their needs. What is it that we can borrow? And one of the key things I see in that framework is the issue of non-formal and informal. How do we incorporate culture and arts into education? Because we know in the African traditional system, education is not just in the classroom. It is out there. And we are very happy. One of the things we'll be doing as NATCOM is actually to create awareness and share this framework. We will share it with all the experts. We'll keep on organizing conferences, engage with the ministry, and also deliberate what are the key priorities where we can start. For example, in the area of culture and creative industries, we have a gap. Most of our artists and people who are in the creative sector, very few have actually gone to any training. They have either gained their skills through mentorship, and what we are looking at as Kenya, how can we incorporate, like in TVET, in higher education, to ensure these people are getting skills, yeah, so that they can be able to produce better quality goods or cultural goods and services that can even meet international standard. When we look at our music, I think it is only Kabrak that has a proper music school. But when we have like the drama, music, and cultural festival in schools, where does that talent go? Where does it train? What can we begin to do? Then when we talk about the gaps in teaching, in schools where we don't have teachers who can teach. If you go to Japan or Korea, the people who teach arts and culture, like the martial arts, they are not the teachers. They are the masters of that art. But the government comes to give them that teaching skill, which they don't have. And you could have one teacher actually teaching in several schools. Yeah?
like a master of that visual art. If we have a very good visual artist, but he doesn't have the skills to teach, how can he be helped to be able to use that lesson within several schools in an area? He can even be part-time. So what we'll be looking at is how can we use this framework to be able to address our current challenges. And I believe it is going to be a long process where we will prioritize and work with stakeholders. And NATCOM, we are committed to sharing, because our work is to share UNESCO-based practices so that we check what we can adopt. We don't have to adopt everything. UNESCO respects sovereignty of nations. They do not force. It is member states that have come up with this, and they will choose how they can implement, because it is for our own good. And if we lose our languages and our cultural expressions, what it means, the country loses a lot in terms of, like when you look at imports of our cultural expressions, our music, our film, how much money are we spending as a country importing foreign content? We have the Indian films, we have Korea, they are in their languages, but they have subtitles. If we develop our own, we'll also be able to contribute to the economy. Thank you very much. Maybe Nancy, you have something? No. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam, for the good presentation and also for the responses. And I think this is a conversation that we should have, and trying to look at where the rain began beating us. Because I remember the provost has talked about something which is eating us. Because in most cases, the policies that we have, they are totally foreign. And I can tell you, one of the problems we have actually is what the last speaker said, trying to meet international standards. What is international? And maybe the last thing you have touched on is on our film, for example. I will use that one as an example. Kenya is not as rich as Nigeria is in terms of film industry. The reason is this. Nigeria decided that there is no international manual that they are going to use to produce their film. They are going to wear their leaves, they are going to sing their song, they are going to beat their drum. So they were trying to create their standard from where now what we call international can borrow a standard from. And therefore, when we are judging Nigerian film, we don't have international manual to use. You come to Kenya, we try to imitate Hollywood, and therefore, our product, if we start marking it, we use the Hollywood manual. Tell me, with our innovations and technology, can we beat Hollywood? If we had decided to stop looking at that international thing, because one of our problems, even in coming up with the scholarship, is to try to have international standards. For example, yes, we have been learning English, for example. We are saying that is an international language. How many of Kenyans go to work in international places? Of course, we cannot forget about the commerce that should be driven by language. Yes, it is good. But we have a problem in our mindset that we are trying to meet some standards, and the standards do not care about us. And if you look at, for example, do you know, if you go around Kenyan libraries, you cannot, it is very rare, you will find very few books in Kalenjin, very few books in Kikuyu, very few books in Kamba. But I can shock you, go to Western countries, and you will find a Kikuyu book in their libraries. And those who have actually gone to international libraries, you can prove me wrong. You go to Germany, you get to any of their libraries, you find a Kanban book. You find a Kalenjin book. They have sections, actually, the African sections, where you can read books, and they collect those resources from us, and they store them in their libraries. But for us, we have no such resources. How do we expect to move forward? Much of what now the 21st century learning is actually self-learning. I can tell you, I knew English myself. I knew to speak English when I was at the university. I never used to know English. I used to speak broken English, of course, learning English, I passed, but speaking is another thing altogether. I'm privileged to have come in a place where I did 4 mother tongues. So I know Kikuyu, I know Kamba, I know Meru, and I know Embu/Mbere. And I used to do those 4 papers in my lower primary. By the time we were going to secondary, we were speaking those languages, but we were also doing English. Of course, it's a must. When I was coming to the university, I could not write, and I remember one thing I usually say. I was doing literature major, and my professor told me, you will never be a good writer. You are writing poor English. Many years later, today, I am a writer. I learned, and I am a writer. But you see, the standards that we use is, I think, what takes us far from where we are. So in the first place, do we have resources? Can our libraries accept to procure books in our languages? Because if we do that, anyone will be able even to go there, because self-teaching is actually part of evolution of education, self-learning. You go to the United States now, they are talking about uneducating. Actually, they are moving away from the institutionalized, formalized education to self-education. They are calling it uneducating. So if we had resources in our libraries, students will go there and read, even when they are not doing it in the curriculum. Those who are interested, they will go there and pick a book and say, this is Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Jambanene na Bathi Mathagu, which we didn't understand why Ngugi wa Thiong'o tried to do it, but it failed because of our mindset. You remember there was that time when Ngugi wa Thiong'o decided to write in Kikuyu. And he was told, no, you write for a bigger audience. And he wrote those books, Gahikadeda, Shaitani Mudharavaini, Murogi wa Kagogo, all those in Kikuyu, but they could not go anywhere because our libraries could not store those books in Kikuyu. And that is our problem. So where do we begin? I think we need to first of all start producing resources in our languages. And that is why I said the School of Education is at the center. And that is why Provost was saying, we need to know who is going to drive this. And then now those who are at those institutions where they are making policies, I can tell you what we have presented here. It looks good, but it is international. But unless we decide to create our local, international thing will never help us. Because international is international. We will be speaking and writing and producing resources for someone else and not for us. And I think that is something we need to take to account and find a way now of having also our libraries now accept the kind of scholarship that we are having in this country. And I think that is where the problem is. So there is always a place to begin. I think that was the point of B, that we have a lecturer here. We have very few languages. There are countries that have many languages. You go to South Africa, hey, you will be shocked. We are talking about us 70. You go to South Africa, you talk about 300. You go to Nigeria, you talk about and tens of thousands dialects. But they are our strength. They are not our weakness. And the last thing is this. The assumption that we cannot teach language because we are diverse, I don't think is true, because we have more community primary schools. We have more primary schools in rural areas compared to urban areas. And if we can have those ones learn, we can have a significant pool of people who know their languages. We are not saying it is possible for everyone to know their mother tongue, but it is possible if it is implemented at a certain level. Thank you, Adi. Sorry for speaking for long.
Thank you very much for the contributions and the responses from Daktari. There's somebody who has been online since 10, and she has an engagement at 2. So she's requesting just to present for 10 minutes. I know that the sugar levels are too low, in fact, tending to 0. So, but let us just give Prof just 10 minutes. It's a humble request. Snivio, asante kabisa. So, next is Professor Angeline Kioko, presenting on indigenous languages in Kenyan CBC. She's online. Please, you can connect her. Hello, Prof. Are you getting us?
Hello. Yes, very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, we've not been able to hear you very clearly. It's been very soft from your side. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, we are very sorry for that. We can get you.
Okay.
We are getting you very well. Continue.
Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you. I think I'm beginning from where one of the questions that was asked begins. How do we teach these indigenous languages when there are so many of us from so many indigenous languages? I was to present this paper with my colleague, Dr. Naomi Nyarigoti, and we were ready for the program at 11:30. And she had a commitment that she couldn't leave, so I'll do it alone. And I hope it will be okay. I believe I have permission to share my screen. Do I? I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, so we are talking about indigenous languages in Kenya's CBC, the perspective of teacher trainees. And as the last presenter indicated, the CBC requires that teacher trainees study indigenous language as a learning area in college. And so the background of this is that we undertook a research, and we are looking at the diploma in early childhood education, the diploma in primary education, and the upgrades from certificate to diploma students. So that's a research. And the background really of this is that that framework and partly the CBC introduction of mother language in colleges was part of complying to the provisions of the legal framework in Kenya. And I think we know that the Constitution provides for the development and use of indigenous languages in Kenya. And the language in education policy requires that learners in early years education are taught using the language of the catchment area. And the language of the catchment area in the rural areas is mother languages. Again, much of this is based on research that has been conducted, and I'll just mention a few. There's a lot that has been done to show that schooling based on mother tongue is significant for learning. Let me just move something so that I can see my slides better. Yes, and that learners learn better when they can associate sounds and objects and concepts with what they already know. In other words, you learn to read and write names of objects that you actually know what they are easier. And again, as has been said by the presenters earlier, it promotes cultural heritage. And apparently research has shown that if you develop literacy in your mother tongue, it will be easier for you to develop literacy in English and Kiswahili or in other languages, because the reality is that you won't be learning the skill of associating letters and sounds. You'll already have learned that. What you'll be learning is what the association of those letters and sounds in that particular language is. So you already will have enough knowledge to transfer. So as I've said, the presentation is part of a larger research which sought to answer several questions with regard to the implementation of the mother language, or as they call it, indigenous language program in teacher training colleges. So the research was mainly a descriptive survey. We did 3 out of 6 pilot, we studied 3 out of the 6 pilot colleges. Let me just say that initially only 6 colleges were to pilot that teaching, but before their students went to up to the end, the program was scaled up to other colleges. And so what we did were in-depth interviews with the principals and tutors, focus group discussions with the tutors and trainees, classroom observation, and document analysis. So we used 3 teacher training colleges, one in Kiambu, one in Machakos, and one in Mombasa. And we, as I've said, interviewed and discussed with tutors, principals, and trainees. And in total, we worked with 35 trainees from those 3 colleges. And these trainees fell into the various categories: the pre-service and upgrade trainees for the diploma in primary education, and the pre-service and upgrade trainees in the diploma in early childhood education. So the general findings are that there are curriculum designs and they are in English. And the content in the curriculum designs is generic. Generic means that it doesn't take care of the specific features of a language. So whether you are teaching, it is Kalenjin or Bantu, whether it's Bantu, Nilotic, Amharic, it doesn't matter. It's just a generic curriculum for teaching any language. Then the trainees in these colleges are from different diverse linguistic backgrounds. The language of instruction during the indigenous language lesson is English, and perhaps that begins to answer the question that was asked by one of the participants. The assessment is in English, and where projects are in indigenous languages, trainees are expected to provide translation. Again, also in the general findings, there are no texted books for indigenous languages. Actually, in the classes we observed, the tutors went to class carrying the design. Trainees carry out projects, assignments in groups representing the various indigenous languages represented in the class. So if there are Kambas, they'll go and do the project together. The project will be the same, but you do it in Kikamba, you do it in Kalenjin, you do it in Gikuyu. And the trainees from minority groups are supposed to either join a related language. If you are the only one, for example, from Embu, you'd be told to choose to join Meru, Kamba, or Gikuyu group. Or alternatively, do the project alone and make consultations with people from home. And I'm looking at this and saying, yes, this is intergenerational learning in that they would be getting information from their parents or grandparents about their language. The work done in indigenous language is then translated so that the teacher, who may not be knowledgeable, okay, actually, who is not knowledgeable in all the languages, can access and get to know what the learners have written. As we have said that the tutor is not competent in the languages, and I want to add that the tutors were not initially trained to teach these indigenous languages. Initially, they expected that tutors in Kiswahili would be the ones who would teach the indigenous language learning area. But then the challenge was the tutors in Kiswahili are used to teaching in Kiswahili, and therefore they found this design that is in English, and the lesson is supposed to be delivered in English very difficult. So really the people that ended up initially teaching are the tutors who were English teachers. And actually the lessons mainly sounded like some linguistic lesson where English is the main language of exemplification. Right, so now I want to look at the trainees' perspectives, what we learned when we observed them in class, when we interviewed them, when we got them into a focused discussion. One of the things is that they appreciated that they have developed literacy skills in their indigenous languages, and others said in their parents' indigenous languages, because the languages hadn't been their languages before they went to college. They also say that they had become creative in developing language materials. Yeah, because there are no materials, they'll be told to go and take a photograph and then write a story that is appropriate for PP1, for those who are in early childhood, or from grade 3. And so they had become good story writers with illustrations. They also say that they have learned a lot about other indigenous languages from the class presentations. And they've come to appreciate that all languages